prior to the origin of matter, there is no matter to do the causing. That's what we mean by the origin of matter, that's where it starts.
Right.
You cannot use the word before for the Big Bang. Time began at the Big Bang. There was no before the Big Bang. I know it's contrary to common sense.
Well, it makes no sense, does it? And that's what I mean. I think you're a logical man. That cannot make sense to you. The idea that you're not even allowed to use the word before the Big Bang, when every part of both of our brains tells us that that's obviously nonsensical, doesn't that make you think again?
Richard Dawkins went on Piers Morgan yesterday and finally had his feet held to the fire on some of the baseless claims that he has been making, going all the way back to the God delusion. Let's get into this.
I want to know why. After my last conversation with the esteemed professor, which I thoroughly enjoyed, he said this.
There was a recent interview you did with Piers Morgan and you sort of touched on it. I think it felt like you didn't really believe that he believed that there's this afterlife and God and things like that. And I
said that, yes.
Yeah. How do you think they don't deep down believe it?
I can't speak for them in the abstract. Something made me think Piers Morgan didn't believe. I think Piers Morgan's a fool. So I'm not really much interested in what he believes, actually.
Oh, you said something similar off air, and I didn't think you would repeat it. Well, he interrupts a lot, doesn't he?
Sure, you can say that again.
Well, Mr. Dawkins joins me exclusively again now to do battle with the fool. Richard, I thoroughly enjoyed our last conversation. Why would you turn on me like that afterwards?
I did too. Well, I've already explained that to your people why I did.
Well, I haven't heard it yet.
But it was nothing to do with what... Oh, OK. Well, in that case, they're remiss in not telling you, but I'll tell you afterwards. But it was nothing to do with anything you said. It was a question that you asked me that I thought you shouldn't have asked me.
Oh, OK. OK. Yeah, I think there was a subject matter you didn't want to discuss.
Okay, so first of all, I love Piers's approach here of let's play the clip of you talking to another person about me on my show and then have you face the music of what you said about me. Love that. Love the integrity that asks of both parties. But just wait a second, because you're probably wondering, what is this question that was off limits and not allowed to be asked? Let's keep going.
There was a very good reason for that. I explained that to your people. They should have passed it on to you. I don't know why they didn't.
OK, but just to be clear, you don't think I'm a fool?
I do not. I was irritated by one question that you asked me, which I think should not have been, and I simply forgot to ask you not to ask it. I nearly always do ask you not to ask that question. OK,
well, we can move forward in the spirit of mutual non-foolishness.
Let's move forward. I do not think you're a fool, no.
Thank you. Well, I would hope not, because you're back on the programme and it's great to have you and I love talking to you. Let's talk about this issue of God, because we had a long chat about this last time. I do believe, for what it's worth, I do believe in God. I do believe in an afterlife. I find it comforting. I also find, as I said to you last time, I find it explains things which are otherwise completely inexplicable. And we had a guest on recently, Professor Stephen C. Meyer, who's a prominent believer in intelligent design, or what he calls the God hypothesis. He watched our last interview that you and I had, and this is what he said about it.
Dawkins wants to portray theistic belief as if it's equivalent to belief in fairies, and he'll concede that, well, it's possible. But I think there's a stronger argument for the theistic case. And that is that when scientists and philosophers reason from evidence, they typically use a method of reasoning that has a technical name. It's called inferring to the best explanation, where the best explanation is one where you're invoking a cause which has the kind of powers that would be required to explain the phenomenon of interest. And you correctly pointed out in your conversation with him that when you get back to that, what physicists often call the singularity, the point where matter, space, time, and energy begin to exist, the materialist is really up against a huge conundrum, because prior to the origin of matter, there is no matter to do the causing. That's what we mean by the origin of matter, that's where it starts.
Right.
And so if you want to invoke a cause which is sufficient to explain the origin of matter, you can't invoke matter. it's in principle, the materialistic explanations are in principle insufficient. So you need to invoke something which is external to the material universe and is not bounded by time and space as well. And that starts to paint a picture of the kind of cause you would need that has the sort of attributes the traditional theists have traditionally associated with God.
Okay, so again, great articulation of the problem with materialism is that how do you get a materialistic cause if matter itself is the thing that came into existence? Also, quick aside, if you guys like Dr. Stephen Meyer, if you like his book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, we're actually about to start reading it in the Wisdom Society, and then we're going to be joined by Dr. Stephen Meyer on October 3rd in the Wisdom Society. Click the link in the description if that's something that you'd be interested in joining and being a part of. Now let's listen to what he has to say here.
Now, you see, Richard Dawkins, this is the nub of, I think, my whole issue with your position on this. And you can respond, obviously, to what you just heard in a moment. But given your new book is about the genetic book of the dead, and it effectively takes us from here to in perpetuity on a genetic trail where each part of existence feeds the next and so on. And I totally subscribe to that. The genome of every body and every organization and so on creates, as you say, a comprehensive dossier on all the world as it moves forward. I get it. But when you go back to the very start, what is there before that? And that, I think I asked you last time, and Professor Meyer brought that up again as being the flaw in your position, which is what is there before it starts? What is nothing?
This is a question for a physicist, not a biologist, but what I would answer to Professor Meyer is that we need to explain complexity in terms of simplicity. And of course it's true that I cannot say what was there before the Big Bang. Physicists sometimes tell us that the word before doesn't even mean anything before the Big Bang. But whatever it was, it
but it
got to be
has to,
simple.
doesn't it?
You cannot suddenly invoke...
Doesn't it have to? I mean,
I didn't hear that.
someone as logical as you are, and I believe you are, you think about this all very logically. A logical mind surely has to appreciate that before the Big Bang, there has to have been something before then. Otherwise, what is nothing?
A physicist will tell you that
Yeah, but what do you tell me?
I'm trying to tell you what a physicist would say first of all. They would say that you cannot use the word before for the Big Bang. Time began at the Big Bang. There was no before the Big Bang. I know it's contrary to common sense. Physicists don't necessarily deal with common sense.
Well, it makes no sense, does it? And that's what I mean. I think you're a logical man. That cannot make sense to you. The idea that you're not even allowed to use the word before the Big Bang, when every part of both of our brains tells us that that's obviously nonsensical, doesn't that make you think again?
We are not physicists. I, like you, am completely baffled by what physicists say to me, which is that you cannot use the word before for before the Big Bang. Time itself began at the Big Bang. Now that is totally counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive to me, it's counterintuitive to you, it's counterintuitive to Stephen Meyer, but we are not physicists. And you need to talk to a physicist. Talk to a physicist about that. And they will tell you that you cannot use the word before for the Big Bang.
Yeah, but you think that's as preposterous as I do.
I do because I'm not a physicist.
If something flies in the face of reason and common sense, it remains to do so, even if it is espoused by a few people with letters next to their name. The idea that physicists have some special different apparatus from a biological adaptation standpoint to be able to explain to the rest of us stupid people, I have a hard time following this, but you'll see more of what I mean by that in a second here.
You've just written a book as a biologist called The Genetic Book of the Dead, in which you talk about the body and the genome, comprehensive dossiers and so on. So you're prepared to expound a philosophy based on that as a biologist, which I completely respect, and it makes perfect sense. The book makes perfect sense the way that you have written it. But why would you then think that a physicist cannot be contradicted just simply because they're a physicist? I could contradict what you say as a biologist.
No, you really aren't getting it. I'm so sorry. Modern physics is exceedingly mysterious. It really is. I mean, have you tried to read some of the difficult modern physics books? It really is very difficult to understand. And intuition doesn't do it. You cannot use human intuition. Human intuition was built up by evolution over many millions of years to survive on the African plain, hunting and gathering, looking for waterholes, looking for mates and so on. Our brains were not built to understand the profundities of the origin of the universe, the end of the universe, the kind of things that physicists deal with. I think it's actually amazing that at least some human brains are capable of dealing with this kind of stuff. My brain isn't, and nor is yours.
It's extremely intuitive, logical, and obvious to ask what came before the Big Bang, because it itself is an event that requires something prior to it to cause it. This is basic reasoning, and yet the sort of appeal to authority in the form of physicist as a higher evolved type of brain from a biological perspective it's honestly one of the weirdest arguments that I've heard, but let's continue.
No, but that's my point, though.
I wish it were.
Well, yeah, I wish both our brains could. But the truth is, it's because the human brain can't comprehend this, including, I don't think, any physicist. Because the moment they say you can't have before the Big Bang, they lose me completely just on a common sense perspective. It's that reason that I think there has to be a power that is greater than the human brain. And that gives me succor to my belief in God, and why I think people turn to gods of different types, obviously. They turn to that because it is incomprehensible otherwise what has happened here.
There has to be something more difficult to understand than the human brain can understand. I accept that. But it doesn't have to be God. It doesn't have to be the kind of God who, forgives sins and listens to prayers and things like that. There is something very mysterious, and I don't understand it, and you don't understand it, and maybe we never will. I think it's not clear whether physicists understand it. Some do, some don't, but it's obviously going to be very mysterious. But God is not that interesting mystery. God is just a personification of human desires, a father figure, something like that, somebody who looks after you. You said at the beginning that it was comforting for you. A God is somebody who listens to prayers, who forgives sins, who takes action for the benefit of humanity or not, as the case may be. We're not talking about that now. We're talking about deeply, deeply mysterious, profound things which physics is working on, and it's very difficult to understand. And the fact that you don't understand it and I don't understand it is not good grounds for suddenly invoking a supernatural sky daddy.
So you see here, he basically defaults back to the straw man rather than embracing the mystery. And all I have to say is, Richard, embrace the mystery, brother, and embrace the fact that whatever that cause is of the Big Bang, of the singularity, of space, time, matter, and energy, of the universe itself, it itself must be, by definition, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, and personal to choose to create. This is admittedly one piece of the puzzle, one piece of the Christian worldview, but a significant one nonetheless, in that, to the point that Stephen Meyer was making, it does offer an explanation. It does offer a explanation where otherwise there is no explanation. Then you begin to combine on top of that, well, wait a second, if there is a personal, powerful, pre-existent cause for matter itself, which is logically necessary, then what else would that explain? Well, it would explain, for example, human consciousness. It would explain the fact that we possess a mind, and if our mind comes from a pre-existent mind, that makes more sense than that our mind came out of matter. Also, given that we haven't even explained the origin of mind, the origin of life, the origin of morality, the origin of love. And it also just really shows, why are you talking so much about God and about the origin of the universe and about the quote unquote God delusion, when in this final moment you've admitted that your view of God is that he's a psychological manifestation, a coping mechanism, however he put it there, a sky daddy. You've admitted that that's how you define God, but now you're projecting your definition onto everybody else and calling your definition of God a delusion, when people like myself and probably like many viewers on this channel, when we talk about God, we are talking about the great I am, the creator of the universe, the Alpha and the Omega, God in the most transcendent possible sense. I've actually been watching a whole series on Greek mythology, and all of these gods are actually downstream from matter. It's like Gaia, was created with chaos, and then you have Kronos, and then Kronos created Zeus, and all of the gods in mythology are created beings, but there's one God who is an uncreated being. He is himself the uncaused cause of everything else, the unmoved mover of everything else, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the end, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. There is a God in heaven. He is good. And I know that because he has made himself known to us in the person of Christ. If you look at the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus from Nazareth, you will begin to understand what the God of the universe is like. And I know people go, whoa, you just made a huge stretch from talking about astrophysics to talking about a Jewish guy 2,000 years ago in a small part of the planet. I agree that I did. But look into the life of Jesus, the words of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus. Follow that path. Allow yourself to be led to the place where the shadow of the cross rests on an empty tomb, and there all questions can be answered, because you will find that there is a cohesiveness to the reality that we inhabit that, again, otherwise is left entirely disparate. There is a wholeness that is otherwise fragmented. There is a unity that is otherwise completely left in chaos. With that being said, again, guys, shout out to the Wisdom Society. Click the link in the description if you guys like this type of content, like these types of conversations, want to join Stephen Meyer himself on October 3rd in the Wisdom Society. You are welcome. Join us there. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.
Join today. Support this channel. Invest in yourself. Grow in faith. Connect with believers from around the world. Click the link in the description to find out more.